Black Sabbath. When it comes to influential bands of the 1970s, they are for me one of the most significant. The band that spearheaded the genre what we call today heavy metal, and the four guys from Birmingham that started it all are as followed: Tony Iommi on guitar, Geezer Butler on bass, Bill Ward on drums, and last but certainly not least, Ozzy Osbourne on lead vocals. Yeah, in this video I'm not talking about that lineup. I'm sure most Black Sabbath fans know that the band has gone through many lineup changes over the years. Following Ozzy's departure in 1978, many singers have taken the frontman position. You got Ronnie James Dio, then Ian Gillan, and even Glenn Hughes. However, there is one singer who seemed to have been pushed under the rug in recent years, and that singer is Tony Martin. Now, Tony Martin has sung on 5 Black Sabbath albums, making him the band's second longest serving vocalist. So why has his era been forgotten? And is his era even that good? Well, in this video, I'm going to go through all 5 of his albums to see if this era is truly underrated. Let's find out. Now, a quick disclaimer, I know there's going to be some Sabbath fans who are going to be typing, "Oh, Black Sabbath's not Black Sabbath without Ozzy Osbourne." Look, this video is not supposed to convince you this era is better. I mean, come on, the stuff with Ozzy is legendary for a reason. This is just a young Sabbath fan giving his opinion on a pretty forgotten era of the band. So hopefully you'll enjoy this, and let's just jump right into it, and hopefully you'll give this video an open mind. Following Ian Gillan's departure from the band after the Born Again tour, the band had decided to take a break. During this time, guitarist Tony Iommi decided to make a solo album entitled 7th Star. This is where you have a different lineup of Tony Iommi, Eric Singer, Dave Spitz, Jeff Nichols, and on vocals you have former Trapeze and Deep Purple singer Glenn Hughes. Once the album was completed, Warner Brothers convinced Tony to make it a Black Sabbath album. Now, this album was a massive flop and the tour didn't fare much better. Glenn had a massive cocaine addiction at this point, and it really affected his voice, and after only 5 shows, he was dismissed. To fill in for the remaining shows, they recruited vocalist Ray Gillan, no relation to Ian Gillan. Impressed by Ray's vocals, Tony asked him to join the band. They would begin writing and recording in late 1968, but problems arose when Ray decided to form a new band called Badlands. After many auditions, they finally picked then unknown singer Tony Martin. After getting the job, Martin went in and re-recorded all of the songs that Ray had already done, therefore he had no involvement in the writing process. The band released The Eternal Idol. Oh, and by the way, there's the personnel list. Yeah, you're going to see that change a lot. And now we finally get to talk about the albums. The Eternal Idol is a very strong album, I must say. It's not the greatest album in their discography by no stretch, but to introduce Tony Martin, I think is a solid one at best. I mean, you have The Shining, which is a great opening track. I like the sound of the guitars. Of course, by this point, I mean, hair metal, that 80s sound was very prominent, and so you definitely hear a little bit of it here, but not too much that it's too distracting. And Tony Martin's vocals, really great. I've always thought he had a really good voice. To me, I see it as kind of a weird blend of Ronnie James Dio and Glenn Hughes. It's kind of a weird mixture of two, if that makes any sense, which is great because now he's able to sing pretty much any era of the band if they want him to. And he can do it. I mean, you can watch many live footage of him singing these songs, and he can do both very well, I must say. But back to the album itself. Of course, you have The Ancient Warrior, very great follow-up song. Hard Life to Love, that's probably my favorite song on the album. Born to Lose. You know, there's a few songs I'm not as crazy about. Maybe they aren't as memorable. I mean, I see this album as kind of a safe one because following 7th Star, which was a huge flop, I mean, it makes sense for them to kind of do something a bit more basic. Maybe go back to that early sound in a sense, but still keep it modern. at this point at least. But overall, I think it's a very good album. And what's good about this CD copy that I have, this is a deluxe edition, and it actually has 2 discs. The first disc is the original album with Tony, but what's cool is that it actually includes the Ray Gillen sessions. So it's pretty much the album, but with Ray Gillen on singing. And it's pretty good too. It does kind of make you ask, like, what if Ray had stayed in the band? And who knows what Tony Martin would have done if he had not joined. But it's kind of a cool little addition to the CD. And I'll quickly talk about the album cover as well. Not one of their best. I know this was based on the statue called the Eternal Idol, hence why it's supposed to look like that. And funny enough, they couldn't get the rights to the actual statue, so they had to make it their own with actual people, and apparently the paint was toxic. I read that no one died, so that's good, but overall, very solid album right here. Now, despite my opinion on the album still sold very poorly, did not chart very much, and so therefore, like I said, they were dropped by Warner Brothers and Vertigo, and they had to find a new home, and that home was BRYER'S Records, which was actually founded by Miles Copeland, Stuart Copeland's older brother, which is kind of cool. By the time they were ready to record the next album, Tony Martin was a lot more adjusted to the band and was ready to get more involved in the writing process. And by 1989, they finally released Headless Cross. I'm just going to come out and say it. This is my favorite album of this era. Heck, this is a top 5 Black Sabbath album for me. I am not joking. I love this album. I just like the sound of it, the production, you know, has that 80s sound, which I know most people aren't going to be into that, but does not bother me at all. I love that sound, and the songs are just so good, very strong. I mean, you have, you know, Gates of Hell, which is kind of like a little, you know, sets the mood, shall we say. But then you get to the title track, and I love the title track. The riff is great, and Tony's vocals just absolutely soaring, especially the chorus. Then you have Devil and Daughter, but then you get to probably my favorite song on here, and one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs in general, and that is When Death Calls. Absolutely killer track. Not only, I forgot to mention, you have Cozy Powell on drums, and he's killing it the whole time. But on When Death Calls, you have a guest on here, and that guest is none other than Brian May of Queen. Of course, as a die-hard Queen fan, I am very biased, and so therefore I love that song because of it, and the solo he does on it is absolutely spectacular. Of course, you have Kill in the Spirit World, Call of the Wild, Black Moon, Nightwing. To me, it's a perfect album. I enjoy this one top to bottom. Again, I know there's people who probably are not going to agree with me on that, but I don't care. I love this album. Spectacular. Go listen to this one if you have not heard any of the Tony Martin stuff. On another good note, this album actually sold decently. I mean, not amazingly, but decently. And it actually got good reviews from critics. And so, with all this momentum they're building, it's time for them to finally make another album. And this is when things got a little bit weird. By this point, Tony Martin was writing the lyrics, and, you know, he was fine writing about, you know, the devil and stuff like that, but one day he asked Tony Iommi, is it okay if he writes something else besides, you know, the doom and gloom? And Tony Iommi was like, no, write whatever you want. And he took that to heart, because in 1990, we have Tear. Now, I will admit, this album is not as strong as Headless Cross, but there's still some good songs on here. I mean, it starts out with Anu Mundi, which is a great opening song with a great guitar riff from Tony Iommi. That's the downside of this era. Sometimes when I say Tony, I have to, you know, specify if it's Iommi or Martin. That's annoying, but regardless, still a good opening song. But then you have Lawmaker, which is pretty good. Jerusalem, great song. The Sabbath Stones, very heavy track. And then you have a couple of those like interlude tracks, you know, the very short stuff. Valhalla, pretty good. Feels good to me, you know, it's a ballad. I'm a sucker for ballads, so I like it. Take it what you will. And then Heaven in Black's pretty solid closing number. Overall, again, not as strong, but still pretty good. And the lyrics are kind of interesting because Tony Martin decided to take the lyrics in a kind of a mythology sort of direction, kind of taking influence from Norse mythology and some other stuff as well. Interesting stuff, but again, the songs just weren't as strong, or I mean, they're pretty strong, but not as memorable, I will say. So that's my only critique of this album, but still very good. I like it quite a bit. Tear did not push the band's momentum, and the band soon fell into obscurity once again. Despite that, by 1992, it was time to make another album. The band began writing, and Tony Martin sung some demos that would make up the next record, Dehumanizer. Could this be it? Was this the album where Tony Martin would finally prove himself as one of Black Sabbath's greatest Oh wait, they replaced Tony and brought back Ronnie James Dio. Whoops. Well, that doesn't really matter, because to the shock of no one, Ronnie would quit not long after. And so it would not surprise me if Tony Iommi was so desperate for a singer he had to phone Tony Martin up and beg him to come back. But he did, and so we get to the next album. We have 1994's Cross Purposes. Gotta love that Scorpions-inspired artwork. Album artwork aside, I will say I do enjoy Dehumanizer. I think it's a really good album. So when you get to this, yeah, it's a little bit of a letdown. But there's still some good songs here. I really enjoy Eyewitness, Cross of Thorns, Dying for Love, and this might be a controversial choice, but I actually really enjoy The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I think that's a really good song. I love the keyboards on it. But besides that, aside from the songs I just mentioned, then there's the other half where maybe not as memorable or as strong as previous albums, but they're still solid. They're not bad by no stretch, but maybe a teensy bit generic sounding. But again, not a huge criticism or anything. There's still good stuff here. So this is definitely going to be one of those albums where you're either going to enjoy it or you're not. I will say it's not one of my top tier Black Sabbath albums, but there's still some enjoyable moments on here, so there's not much to say about it. Just a very decent album. Alright, let's talk about Forbidden. Before we talk about the album itself, first off, what the heck is this album cover? I don't know if this is just on my particular copy or this is just a normal thing, but why is the image quality on this terrible? It's all blurry, it's kind of pixelated a little bit. Just what happened here? Album cover aside, I didn't mention it before, but by this point, Black Sabbath's popularity was at an all-time low. They were not selling any albums really at all. The tours were becoming smaller. So out of desperation, IRS decided to bring in a new producer, and this producer was called Ernie C. Now, Ernie C was in a band called Body Count, which was a rap metal band. And so because they were pretty hip at the time, they thought, why not bring that hipness to Black Sabbath? And the results, I'm going to be frank, not that great. The production is all over the place. There are times Tony Martin's vocals are mixed very low that he's almost drowned out. And Cozy Powell, even though he's a great drummer, fantastic drummer at best, his drumming on here is kind of lackluster. And again, they're mixed so high it drowns out everything. And even the songs themselves are kind of bland, very generic sounding. And what the heck is Ice-T doing on a Black Sabbath album? My guess is that they were trying to capitalize on the success that Aerosmith did with Run DMC, but that was good. This, I don't know what this is. I mean, Tony Martin is kind of trying to rap and shout at the same time. It doesn't really work. And yeah, that's the worst song on the album by far. Then you have Get a Grip. Again, kind of generic. It almost sounds like a Aerosmith song that they make around this time. And I'm not a fan of that era Aerosmith. So that tells you. Can't Get Close Enough's okay. Shaking Off the Chains, another one of my least favorite songs on here. Just again, just the vocal delivery from Tony Martin is just so bizarre. I just can't get into it. Guilty as Hell's okay. Sick and Tired's okay. Rusty Angel's okay. Probably the two songs I actually kind of like is the title track and Kiss of Death, the last song. Besides those two tracks, the rest kind of fall under terrible to just okay. It's not the worst album I've heard, but compared to the whole, this is by far their worst album, really, to me at least. I know some people say Never Say Die, but yeah, this is definitely their lowest point. And kind of a shame because this is the final album with Tony Martin on vocals, so definitely a real shame he had to go out on a note like this. So after going through all 5 of the Tony Martin era albums, now it's time to ask the question: is the Tony Martin era underrated? Now, of course, this is objective. Some people will like this era, some people will not, but I'm just speaking for myself. Yes, I think the Tony Martin era is very underrated. This era of Black Sabbath is not perfect. There are some duds in this period. However, there are lots of songs and albums that I really enjoy. The Tony Martin era, for what it is, did give Black Sabbath some sort of consistency that they desperately needed during that turbulent time. And I'll say this again, it's a real shame a lot of these albums are forgotten. Most people don't even acknowledge this era even existed. Some never even heard of it, period. But there's some good news. In his end of the year video of 2023, Tony Iommi announced that a box set was in the works. And by the time this video comes out, that box set has released. The box set is called Anu Domine, and the albums included are Headless Cross, Tear, Cross Purposes, and a brand new remix version of Forbidden. So hopefully that box set will give Tony Martin his just due.
I have been wanting this for a long time, and here we are now with the whole box set thing in your hand, and wow. It was like 10 years of my life, 10 years of the Sabbath story that was missing.
And that should do it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did, please give this video a like, subscribe if you are new. In the comments below, let me know if you've heard these albums. Do you agree with me? Do you think this era is underrated? What's your favorite songs, favorite album? And that should do it. Other than that, make sure you give these albums a listen, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, and goodbye for now.